My 13-year-old acts like a puppy again. Almost overnight, she's a different dog.
Perfect poops.
When people switch their dog's food to the farmer's dog, the effects can seem like magic. But there's no magic involved. It's simply real meat and vegetables with all the nutrients dogs need, instead of highly processed pellets. No tricks, just smarter, healthier pet food delivered in packs portioned for your dog. It's amazing what real food can do. Get 50% off your first order at thefarmersdog.com/no-magic.
It's back. Odyssey's Oceanfront Concerts on the sands of Virginia Beach, April 26th through 28th, with performances by Juicy J, and Elite Chopper, along with T Grizzly, Skilla Baby, 310 Baby, and Shorty Shorty. A full weekend of entertainment going down Oceanfront with DJs, food, and more. Odyssey's Oceanfront Concerts. Get your tickets now at OdysseyOceanfrontConcerts.com. That's AUDACY, OceanfrontConcerts.com.
Kevin Saal, our guest, athletic director at Wichita State. Kevin, welcome. You're trying to create fire with the Shockers, right?
We absolutely are. How are you guys doing this afternoon?
Good.
Jeff chuckled at that. He didn't like that.
I chuckled at the fact that you made Kevin answer that. But...
Yeah, it was not my best
Jeff,
moment, but we move on.
Well, Jeff, I'm certainly in this club with Bob. That's old. It's old man humor, and you're probably not quite there as an old man. So it's just for the two of us right now.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. So you did a podcast with Paul Sulentrop, our friend, recently, and it got a lot of notoriety. A lot of people listened to it. You talked in depth about N.I.L. and the transfer portal and everything that's going on with college athletics over the last few years that is new to college athletics. So, Kevin, in your position, I'm going to ask you to assess where we are in college athletics. Are we getting this figured out? Are we coming to a place where it's going to seem less hectic and neurotic and maybe a little more in line with what we expect out here as the mass public?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bob. I think you're starting to see a little bit more clarity. There's going to be some NCAA legislation, I think, soon that will provide more clarity on the current environment of unlimited transfers, and maybe put a little bit of more of a fence around that. I think one of the challenges in our industry is the NCAA, which is a membership organization, and there's 363 Division I institutions that are members of the NCAA. So when we say they, what we really mean is us. And I think what's really important to understand is that we're in a climate right now where it's difficult for the NCAA to enforce rules without litigation. And so obviously that's a part of the tenuous unpredictability that you're referencing. But the NIL and the transfer portal obviously are here, and we've got to figure out a way to navigate and generate successful teams and programs and develop young people within that space. And I certainly think that there's an avenue to do so. Last week we met with about 100 folks in the Champions Club in Coke Arena. As you mentioned, we did the podcast and had a lot of individual conversations about NIL and the transfer portal. And I think with most reasonable folks, it's a hard concept to wrap your arms around, me included. It's not necessarily a desirable place, but it's the place that we're at. And, the way I look at it is NIL is an important part of what we do. I think it's more important to retention than it is to recruiting. You got to get the right people in your pro. So, again, we can dive into specifics there, but I think we're in a critical spot, and clarity is what everybody desires. And I think there's a lot of folks trying to work towards clarity so that we can be predictable in what we're doing.
So I'm not going to pretend that I know what you or other athletic directors do with their day, what everything that you have to take care of and sign off on and be a part of. But has your time management changed with? Because it's we can't not ask you about the NIL and the transfer portal. Those are the hot topics. You're going to get those questions. How much time do you spend on those two things? Addressing those things in whatever way that you address them, compared to maybe what you thought you were getting into when you signed up for athletic administration?
Yeah. Well, when I signed up for athletic administration, that was back in 2000, 2001. So obviously, there's a lot has changed in the last couple of decades. But at the end of the day, I think the job of effective administrators is to engage, inform, and then ultimately remove obstacles from the pathways of those that you serve. And we serve our coaches, we serve our student athletes, we serve Shocker Nation. And at the end of the day, we're trying to develop young people in programs. And so NIL and the transfer portal can be obstacles to that. And so we've got to do the absolute best that we can within the capabilities at Wichita State University to remove those as obstacles and give our coaches an opportunity to enter into a competitive recruiting environment. And guys, the way I like to think about NIL is, I do think it's more useful on the retention side, so that when you have quality young people in your program that recognize that they are valued within their program, that they're developing within your program, it's a really effective tool, I think, for retention. If that is the only part of the recruiting conversation, then more often than not, our coaches are going to pass, because at the end of the day, that's a transactional element that really doesn't lend itself to development and building a team and a program. I think so critical to what we do. If you look at the NCAA tournament field this year, and we can just focus on men's basketball, not every team in the tournament has a substantial NIL program, particularly some of the automatic qualifiers from the low to mid-major leagues. But at the end of the day, if you look at the second weekend of the NCAA tournament, most generally every single one of those programs has a substantial NIL program. So we have an expectation here at Wichita State for championships and deep runs in the NCAA tournament, and that's something that we feel like that we've got to have. It's an important component to our program.
So if NIL is used more for retention, what elements are used for recruiting? Would you like that to be more traditional, or has that changed quite a bit too?
Well, from a recruiting standpoint, I will say, and it sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, and I'm certainly not intending to do so. The way I look at NIL's impact on recruiting right now is recruiting is still to have good facilities, you've got to have good coaches, you've got to have an experience that your student athletes value and that they can see that they're improving and developing within that experience. And recruiting's always been about evaluating technical skills and ability, cultural fit, what kind of a young person are you bringing into your program, and you're having conversations throughout that young person's sphere of influence, whether it's guidance counselors or coaches or whatever the case may be, to ensure that you're getting a quality person in your program. And guys, for decades, coaches have missed in the recruiting process as well. It's not a science. It's a combination of a science and an art. I think we have coaching staffs at Wichita State that can then do a really good job of evaluating character and integrity with young people, and that's a real asset. At the end of the day, what NIL is, it's a cost of admission to get into the recruiting process, to recruit elite level talent. And so there is an element of the front end recruitment piece, but at the end of the day, when you get quality people in your program, they're developing well, there's great value in them being a part of your program, and they see that value, then you don't necessarily need to be the nicest house in the neighborhood, i.e. the largest NIL number for retention, when young people realize that they're getting better in your program and they're enjoying their experience. And so that's why I think that the more effective use of those dollars is on the retention side. But don't get me wrong, the recruiting element, there is a minimum cost to get into the recruiting conversations with elite level talent.
Kevin Saal, our guest, athletic director at Wichita State. So the American Athletic Conference just named Tim Pernetti as its commissioner recently on April the 2nd. I presume you know of Tim and know his history and his track record. What are the challenges that face Tim Pernetti as he tries to guide the American Athletic Conference forward?
Well, I do know him relatively well. We've not been on a staff anywhere together, but certainly you guys understand the circles are relatively small, and And obviously with his work at IMG, he's been plugged in with ESPN and ABC, which leads me to my first point. I think you've got to have quality relationships with television partners. Commissioner Oresco certainly had that as a part of his career path working in television. So that piece is really important so that you can position your programs and your conference in a really competitive space from the exposure standpoint, because that ultimately curtails into the recruiting and retention conversations as well. I think conference alignment and conference security is always going to be a topic of discussion, at least in the short term. So just like we've talked about as it relates to Wichita State and conference realignment, you've got to be really well connected in the industry and understand what the shifts and the trends are showing, and be able to respond and react to that, preferably in a proactive way. So I think those are two elements that are really important. At the end of the day, it is a strong league. It is also a league that, if you look at on the men's basketball side, it's a league that has some of the churn in the country in terms of young people going up or down. And so I think that stability, or trying to acquire some greater stability within our programs and our league, is really important, because we all know that continuity helps to build successful programs. So those are two or three things that I think come to mind. Obviously, it takes great resources to put forward competitive programs, and so resource acquisition will be a focus of his, as well as putting on first-class championship events. So look forward to it. I had the chance to connect with him last week after the news, and we're going to set a time where we can sit down individually and just talk about Wichita State athletics and our role and experience within the American Athletic Conference, and as he will do with every AD in the league. So I look forward to working with him for sure.
So you're in the middle of a campaign, the athletic department, asking 5,000 alumni for $500 a year. Do I have that number right? Because I have a follow-up.
Yep, that's exactly right. So we've got a little over 110,000 living alumni of Wichita State University, and our goal is for 5,000 individuals to consider a $500 a year gift. It's about $42 a month. And I would have presumed that your follow-up question is, what are you doing with $2.5 million, and what does that look like for all your sports programs?
The question actually is, how tough of a sell can that be? Because, it must be hard, I presume, to say I would like $500, but there's also no guarantee that we retain these players that you help the NIL for. I know that's what it's probably designed for, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but is that a tough sell?
No, it really – I would tell you that the tough sell has been the dynamic shift and the influence of the transfer portal and NIL. And as you all know, beginning in July of 22, we didn't have a whole lot in the way of infrastructure, and we hadn't educated folks. We spent a lot of time doing that. We didn't raise our first NIL dollars until January 6th of 2023. And so for that program to have started in July 1st of 21, when I was serving as the AD at Murray State, and we were going through all the infrastructure and education pieces there, to walk in here, we were behind. And I think we're certainly making best efforts to get ahead of that. So the education piece, I think, has probably been the greatest obstacle. And I will tell you guys honestly that, one of the things that I think about, and I say this half in jest, I remember the week before I got married, my dad said, you can be right or happy in marriage, but you can't be both at the same time all the time. And so, you chuckle at that. But I do think about, as we're building championship level programs, we can want championships, and we all want those championships. And at the end of the day, the influence of NIL is so critically important to the recruiting and retention space that we can't necessarily want championships and then want nothing to do with NIL either. And so trying to app with folks has been a challenge. And I shared with you earlier that we hosted about 100 folks in the Champions Club last week, and I believe we made some great strides. Certainly has been some significant donations to NIL that have come out of that conversation, along with many others. And there is a general reluctance to support on the NIL side, but there's also beginning to shift the understanding of how critically important it is to championship programs. And so I think we find ourselves in the middle of that conversation and that tension that exists there. And there's been plenty of folks that have been incredibly generous in terms of supporting NIL and maybe doing it a little reluctantly. But I think we're hopefully starting to develop some trust and some credibility in terms of what we're trying to build at Wichita State. I think some folks are buying into that.
Final moments here with Kevin Saal, athletic director at Wichita State. Someday this will all resonate in my brain, and I won't need to ask you as much about it, but I'm not there yet. So is there a limit on the benevolence of people, and NIL's just another thing that people are asked to give to? I run a nonprofit, so I'm very aware of asking people to give. It's very difficult, even if you feel extremely strongly in your program and the good you're trying to do. In a community like Wichita, or really any other community in the country or the world, there's only so many people out there to go to. How big of a challenge is all that, with now the added need to fund NIL?
Well, there certainly are needs, and I would share with you, Bob, that we have a diverse we have a diversity of options that I would say when folks have giving on their heart. And Wichita is, you guys know this more than I do. I'm a 2-year resident of Wichita, and you guys have been around for a lot longer than that. It's a very giving and supportive community. We also know that when the Shockers do really well, Wichita does very well. And that piece is really important, whether it's the business community, whether it's, retention of folks in the community. When you have really successful programs that people want to be a part of, everybody wants to be a part of something that's bigger than themselves. That resonates, and people want that. And so when giving is on their heart, then honestly, we sit down in a genuine way and we talk about the different pathways that might be through the department or through NIL and a collective. And what resonates with folks is the direction that we go. So ultimately for us, Bob, it's really trying to connect with folks that are interested in supporting what we're doing in the development of young people and programs and the academic piece and 50% first-generation college students and all the things that we believe we're impacting young people in a really unique way. And when they just line out the pathways that exist, and certainly we want to focus and direct those dollars in a way that's most comfortable for those generous donors.
Well, I appreciate it. I think I gain a better understanding every time we talk about this. Certainly it's something that's fascinating and interesting and part of the changing nature, almost too fast changing nature of college athletics. Kevin, thank you.
Yes, absolutely, guys. I really appreciate the opportunity maybe to provide some clarity for a few minutes on your program every couple of weeks, and certainly appreciate your support. So thanks for helping us spread the word, and go Shockers.
It's back. Odyssey's Oceanfront Concerts on the sands of Virginia Beach, April 26th through 28th, with performances by Juicy J and Elite Chopper, along with T Grizzly, Skilla Baby, 310 Baby, and Shorty Shorty. A full weekend of entertainment going down Oceanfront with DJs, food, and more. Odyssey's Oceanfront Concerts. Get your tickets now at OdysseyOceanfrontConcerts.com. That's AUDACY, OceanfrontConcerts.com.
My 13-year-old acts like a puppy again. Almost overnight, she's a different dog.
Perfect poops.
When people switch their dog's food to the farmer's dog, the effects can seem like magic. But there's no magic involved. It's simply real meat and vegetables with all the nutrients dogs need, instead of highly processed pellets. No tricks, just smarter, healthier pet food delivered in packs portioned for your dog. It's amazing what real food can do. Get 50% off your first order at thefarmersdog.com/no magic.